What? It won't work. Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight. It is Sunday night, September 15th, 2024, and my name is Glenn Rawson. Behind me are the peaks of the Wasatch Range and the Salt Lake Valley, Mount Olympus and Twin Peaks and the others, all behind me, and I thought that'd be a great backdrop for tonight's fireside. And a thunderstorm just rolled through, and you can see the last of it behind me. Anyway, welcome tonight. Thank you for joining me. I am home on the farm for just a couple of days, and then I'm headed out again Tuesday and then again on Thursday. This time I'll be out on the Pioneer Trail with Dennis Lyman. We're going to go all the way from Nauvoo back into Salt Lake along the Pioneer Trail on a luxury coach, and we are going to have so much fun. This tour is sold out, but coming up on the 30th of September, Dennis and I are going to go out again, this time only for 3 days, to do the story of the Martin and Willie handcart companies coming from all the way from Casper, which is the day where the snow first caught them, all the way back into the Salt Lake Valley. So we're going to do 2 3-day tours. The first one on September 30th, the second one on October 24th. Dennis and I will both be out there together working those tours with you. Now, here's the reason I'm telling you. The last time I told it was sold out. Well, it was, but then they gave us a larger coach, luxury coach. So now we have just a few more seats. On the September 30th, I think we have 2 more seats left. And on the October 24th, maybe 5, 6, 8, I'm not sure on that one. If you'd like to go, this will be an experience of what it was really like for Martin and Willie in October of 1856. If you're interested, you can call Dennis Lyman, or you can just go to historyofthesaints.org, and the information's up there. And you can also find it at glennrawsonstories.com. We'd be happy to help you, okay? All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for letting me share what I have tonight. And would you just drop me a note and tell me how many of you are watching and where you're watching from? It's really good to read those comments. And as always, I ask you to have a faith and prayer in your heart as we go into this, because, well, we'll see how this goes. First story. Mary Lee Bland was born the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner in Kentucky. From her earliest days, much of her care was provided by a personal slave. This is Kentucky in the 1830s. By a slave named Mammy Chloe. As was social custom of the place and the time, Mary Lee's marriage was to be arranged by her father to a neighboring plantation owner's son. But she didn't really like the guy. He proved to be an ill-mannered boor, and Mary Lee broke it off. After that, whenever he would come to call, with the aid of Mammy Chloe, Mary Lee would saddle the horse and ride out into the woods to get away from him. On one occasion, he came, though, and Mammy Chloe was not there to help her saddle the horse. So Mary Lee, in desperation, did it herself and rode off into the trees. Predictably, not too far from the house, the saddle turned and dumped her to the ground. There she lay with an injured back and a foot and unable to move, when a stranger coming along through the woods happened to see her. He went to her, bound up her ankle, and carried her home. Her family was very grateful and invited the young man to stay. He introduced himself as William Fletcher Ewell, a medical student on summer vacation doing missionary work for his church. Well, his teachings were readily received by the Bland family until one day Mary Lee's father was informed by the local gentry that if he continued association with the hated Latter-day Saints, he would lose his place and standing in the community. Mary Lee's father returned home and cast William out. When Mary Lee pleaded for him and for his religion, her father locked her in her room, threatening to never let her come out until she changed her mind. A week later, Mammy Chloe delivered a message to Mary Lee, the prisoner of love. It was from William. Would she be willing to marry him and go off and join the saints? Mary Lee said, "My mind was made up. I knew the gospel was true and was worth any sacrifice. Money and social position meant nothing to me in comparison to a life of usefulness with the one I loved." With the help of her mother and Mammy Chloe, Mary Lee escaped and met William in the woods at the place of their first encounter. And then, rather than take the exotic vacation to Paris that her father had offered her if she would give up her foolish affections for the Latter-day Saints, Mary Lee fled into the woods with William, married him, joined him and his people, and in devotion to Mary Lee, Mammy Chloe left it all and went with her. Now, years later, in the desolation 1846 of winter quarters, her beloved William died in her arms, leaving her with 4 children and a journey of 1,000 miles to the Salt Lake Valley in front of her. Of that moment, in that desperate place, Mary Lee said, "I could have gone back to luxury at home by repudiating our faith, but was not tempted, even in the face of poverty." In time, Mary Lee did make it to the Salt Lake Valley, and with the help of Mammy Chloe, she learned to survive. She learned to spin and weave and thereby support her family. As Mammy Chloe taught her the skills to provide for her family, Mary Lee taught Mammy Chloe the gospel. Mammy Chloe said, "I'd be willing to be skinned alive if I could go in that temple." Even after President Lincoln freed the slaves, Mammy Chloe refused to leave Mary Lee and her family. In highest tribute, Mary Lee Bland Ewell would later say of Mammy Chloe, "She softened all my hardships wherever she could." Before her death in 1898, Mary Lee Bland Ewell completed temple ordinances for many of her family. And then on November 10th, 1987, the temple work was also done for Mammy Chloe and her son, Sammy. The story of our pioneers, no matter the color of their skin, is one of devotion to friends, to family, and to God. Next story. Thurlow Weed, again, that name, Thurlow Weed, was born in 1797, the son of farmers in Greene County, New York. Though just a lad, he went off in the War of 1812 and fought, rising to the rank of quartermaster sergeant. Later, after the military, he worked his way up in the newspaper business. And through that work, Thurlow became interested in politics and was elected to the New York State Assembly when he was only 27. And there he served for many years. Through the skillful use of the press and a shrewd understanding of the political machine, Thurlow Weed became an indomitable force in 19th century New York politics, at one time becoming the absolute boss of the Whig Party in New York. He was considered a master organizer, maintaining strict control of the Whig Party in New York, even when the party was falling apart throughout the rest of the Union. At one time, his newspaper had the largest circulation of any political paper in America. Though a man of strong political ideals and opinions, he was personable and he was popular. And among other things, Thurlow Weed opposed slavery. Now, in 1840, Thurlow Weed backed William Henry Harrison for President of the United States. Harrison won, but he died shortly thereafter. Later on in his career, Thurlow Weed backed General Zachary Taylor for president in 1848, but again, Taylor died in office. Then came the political campaign of 1860, and Thurlow Weed, the political boss, backed an old friend from New York whose election to president seemed a sure thing, William H. Seward. But the nomination, and eventually the presidency, as you know, went to Lincoln. Well, Weed was no fool. He threw all his support behind Lincoln and was a trusted envoy for Lincoln until he disagreed with President Lincoln over the Emancipation Proclamation of 1862. I don't know all of what happened, but Thurlow Weed eventually fell from favor with his party and eventually retired altogether from politics. He died in New York City in relative obscurity, blind, suffering from chronic vertigo. I wonder how many people today even recognize the name of Thurlow Weed, let alone honor his memory. By my experience in telling this story, not too many people even know his name or care. In fact, some even snicker at his name. But let me ask you this. How many of you do remember the name and association with Egbert B. Grandin of the Grandin Press? That name sound familiar? Do you know why? Here's the rest of the story. In July and August of 1829, Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and Martin Harris were looking for someone willing and able to undertake a huge printing project. 5,000 copies of a 588-page book bound in leather, the Book of Mormon. Before they ever signed a contract with 23-year-old Egbert B. Grandin, those four brethren approached other printers, much more skilled and experienced than Grandin, and these from the area of Rochester, a much bigger city. They came to one of those printers twice, asking for his help. This master printer and skilled man ridiculed both Joseph Smith and the book. He would later say, quote, "I thought Joseph Smith a very shallow impostor, and therefore declined to become a publisher, thus depriving myself of whatever notoriety might have been achieved by having my name imprinted upon the title page of the first Mormon Bible." End of quote. That printer who mocked the notoriety and eternal honor of first printing the Book of Mormon was none other than Thurlow Weed. Eventually, all the honors that men bestow will be lost, but the honors that God bestows will all be remembered. Next story. Personal experience, if you don't mind. The air was charged with tension. I was standing with a tour group with Fun for Less Tours in Jerusalem, right in line, waiting to get up on the Temple Mount, standing near the Dung Gate. A group of young Jews formed themselves into a circle just off to our left, a few feet away, and began dancing, holding hands, chanting, and singing. Louder and louder they became until they captured the attention of all within earshot. Joseph and I were standing there looking at this, wondering what was going on. I looked back up over my shoulder on the platform above me, and there were journalists, cameramen, taking pictures and capturing sound bites. Armed security guards hovered nearby, watching this whole thing play out. Well, not too much time passed, and we were still standing in line. And all of a sudden, shots rang out on the hill, the mount, the Temple Mount, just over to our right. All of us instinctively ducked and turned toward the sound. Was that gunfire? Was voiced up and down the line. It started again, and it continued. The tone and volume of the explosions varying. It was right there. It was right above our heads. Clearly, whatever it was signaled trouble with the Palestinians up on the hill. Police could be seen running toward the mount and across the high walls of the Temple Mount above us. My people began to get nervous. I said to Joseph, I think we need to get them out of here as quickly as possible. So we led our people on through and down close to the western wall. I'm sure you can appreciate how difficult it is to shepherd 85 nervous or frightened people through a milling and angry crowd. Nevertheless, a few minutes later, we were down by the western wall and safely away from the area of trouble. It was at that point we heard another lone explosion that one of our men in the group with military experience identified as tear gas. Well, before long it was over. We went on with our tour. We didn't get to go up on the Temple Mount that day. Too much tension, too dangerous. We toured through the holy and sacred sites of the sacred city of Jerusalem. Later that day, television and newspaper reports indeed confirmed the events that we had witnessed firsthand. Jews angry with Palestinians, Palestinians angry with Jews, and police in the middle, forcefully trying to keep them apart. Where were we? The Temple Mount in Jerusalem, once the holiest site, where the magnificent ancient temple of Herod once stood. Why were those Jews so angry and demonstrating? Because they wanted to go up on that mount and stand on that once holy ground and pray, ground that was now held by Palestinians. And why were the Palestinians angry? Because that ground was among the holiest on earth to them as well. And in their way of thinking, they did not want infidels up there. It struck me with a sense of irony. For almost 2,000 years, the Jews have mourned the loss of their holy temple and prayed continually at its foundation walls for the day when that temple would be rebuilt. Both sides, Jew and Palestinian, were willing to fight to the very death, the last drop of blood on that spot, in defense of their holy ground and for the privilege of worshiping at the mountain of the Lord's house. What the Jews want more than anything else, even to the laying down of their lives, collectively and individually, is the return of the holy temple. Caused me to reflect. Do we love the temple that much? Right there, I'm staring right at the spire of Moroni on the temple. Do I love the temple as much as they did and do? Let's take a break for a second. How are you? I hope and pray that you're well. The Year 5 book collection of stories is here and will be coming out shortly if it's not out already. I've been out of the country, so I'm not sure what the status is of that book. And so far, I haven't received any word about its condition. So, like I said, I've been out of touch for a while. Anyway, I wanted to announce something else kind of fun. Some of you will remember that I went to St. George a year or two ago and performed there with the Southern Utah Heritage Choir. Well, Sid and the choir asked me to announce and let you know the Southern Utah Heritage Choir is going on tour, a tabernacle tour across Utah. They will be performing October 15th in the Logan Tabernacle, October 16th in the Brigham City Tabernacle, and the 17th in Ogden, and the 18th in Manti. And as to the quality of the music and the performance, oh, they are good. They are good, inspiring, edifying, fun to watch. If you need a good date night or just something good to do on one of those nights, trust me, this will work. Next story. This came and happened to me, again, like the last story, while I was out on tour. Every week, you and I are reminded to take upon us the name of Christ. Just this morning in the sacrament. I have often pondered, what exactly does that mean? How do we take upon ourselves the name of Christ? Well, I still don't know the whole of that answer, but maybe this story will help just a little bit. Some years back, we flew into Hong Kong at the beginning of our tour of China. There we had the privilege of meeting Sam and his friends. They welcomed us, reviewed our itinerary, and discussed the next 2 weeks of touring. Our guides were appointed, the meeting closed, and Sam left. We never saw him again. Nor did we have any idea at that moment of the power of that man in China. Now, a few days later, we came to the airport in the city of Shenzhen. It was around 4 in the afternoon. We were there to catch a flight to Guilin. We were sitting there waiting when all of a sudden pandemonium hit the airport. I mean, people were running and shouting and screaming and yelling, and it was just chaos. We wondered what in the world was going on because we couldn't understand the word that was being said, but we later learned that terrorists had either placed bombs on aircraft or had called and threatened that they had done so. Either way, it didn't make any difference. Chaos hit, flights were grounded, planes were evacuated out on the tarmac. It was a mess. We saw our own airport on CNN that night. Well, as everything went out of control around us, we sat in the airport waiting to see if we could even get out. We were over 100 tourists stuck and stranded. Hours dragged on. Other people, not in our group, but other people, likewise stranded, became angry. Fights broke out. Shouting matches rang through the terminals. And finally, the word came, there would be no flights, in or out. The second time that's happened to me. What would we do now? I cannot describe how exhausted we were. I still remember to this day acutely being so tired and so grumpy and completely helpless. Then we got word from the airline that buses and a hotel had been arranged for us in the city. What? How? At that late hour and that many people? Well, the buses showed up. I helped load up all of our people, and we spent the night, a very short night, in the most colorful hotel I have ever been in. Someday, ask me about that hotel in person, and I'll tell you, but I will never tell you over the air. The next morning, at 8 in the morning, after only 2 or 3 hours of sleep, we went back to the airport. And as we waited to be shuttled to our flight, I noticed that quite a number of the local passengers were really, really angry. There was shouting all around us from the Chinese. I don't think I was the only one who was more than relieved when we finally got on our aircraft and took off. Well, We landed in Guilin, and the rest of our trip came off without a hitch. It was only later that I learned the rest of the story. When things went awry in Shenzhen, someone called Sam. Sam understood our precarious situation. We were foreigners in the middle of a mess and on an unyielding schedule. We had to get out. It was Sam who called the airline and asked them to arrange hotels in a city that is notoriously always short of rooms. It was Sam who arranged for us to be top priority on the first flight out the next morning. It was Sam who, because of our delayed schedule the next day, arranged for another boat to meet us on the Lee River. It was Sam and his wonderful friends who made sure that our journey across their country was successful and that no one hurt us and we got home safely. It was as though he said, "You see that group of lost, frightened foreigners and strangers? They're mine. Take care of them for me." And they did. I believe that when we take the Lord's name upon us, we become His, and all His power and influence come to bear to get us safely home. You see those lost and stranded souls over there? They're mine. Take care of them. Get them home safely. There is no prison worse than the one we put ourselves in. In ancient Jerusalem, there was a man beside the pool of Bethesda. He was terribly afflicted and scarcely able to move. He languished in lonely misery beside the pool, waiting with many others for the water to stir, hoping that by some miracle, this time, he might be the first one to enjoy the angel's waters. It had been 38 years since his sins so entrapped and afflicted him. 38 desperate years. He had done all that he could to free himself of the pain and of the affliction, but all to no avail. There was no hope, only the hope of a myth and water. Then one day, a stranger who didn't belong there entered the porches of Bethesda and walked among the multitude of the sick folk. Coming to that man, Jesus knew him and stopped. "Wilt thou be made whole?" the Savior asked without preamble. "Sir," the impotent man respectfully replied, "I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. But while I'm coming, another steppeth down before me." And then the master said, "Rise, take up thy bed and walk." And for the first time in almost 40 long years, the impotent man stood and he walked and was whole. Having no power to come to Jesus, Jesus came to him. The Savior has said repeatedly, "Come unto me." If you think this journey to Jesus can be made whenever and however you choose, or that it's a one-time trip, my friend, you are mistaken. The journey to Jesus is the journey beyond a lifetime. None of us have any more power to come to Him than He gives us, nor can we come any closer to Him than He allows. Praise be to God that He wants us. He loves us and wants all of us near Him, so near Him as to be described as in Him, and will and will, my friend, at the appointed time come for each of us, even you. Especially will he come for those humble prisoners who want to come and be closer to him, but just don't know how. Next story. After his resurrection, Jesus led his disciples out to the Mount of Olives, where he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which was taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as you've seen him go into heaven. And we live for that day when he will descend in power and glory. However, what many do not know is that this was not the last time his holy feet touched this earth. Sometime after his ascension, there was a large group of his faithful disciples gathered together in the Americas at a place called Bountiful. These were his people, and they were gathered where else? At the temple, discussing him, when suddenly they heard a voice as if it came out of heaven. They looked around, but they couldn't understand what it was saying. The voice pierced them to the very center, causing their hearts to burn and their bodies to quake all over. The voice came again, and again they did not understand it. When the voice came the third time, they understood and looked up. Behold, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, in whom I have glorified my name. Hear ye him. As they looked up, they saw a man clothed in a white robe descending out of heaven. He came down and stood in the midst of them. Not one of them spoke. Every eye was fastened on him. They thought it was an angel. As his feet touched the ground, he stretched out his hand and said, Behold, I am Jesus Christ, whom the prophets testified shall come into the world. And suddenly they knew him and remembered that it had been promised that Christ should show himself unto them after his ascension into heaven. And can you imagine the Spirit of the Lord on that moment? All of them fell to the earth. Arise, he bid them, and come forth unto me, that you may thrust your hands into my side, and also that you may feel the prints of the nails in my hands and in my feet, that ye may know that I am the God of Israel, and the God of the whole earth, and have been slain for the sins of the world. End of quote. And I love this. Each one of them responded. One by one, they went forth and felt those sacred wounds until they had all gone forth. Every person saw, every person felt, and every person knew of a certainty that he was Jesus the Christ. So overwhelming was that moment that in unison they cried out, Hosanna, blessed be the name of the Most High God. And once more, they fell at his feet and worshiped him. All their lives, they had waited for him. And now he was here. And one by one, one at a time, he had time for them. Why is that story recorded in the sacred library? Because I think it begs this question. Will his kindness and compassion for the faithful be any less at his second coming for you? Will he have time for you? I think so. I know so. My friends, good night and God bless.